Hi, everybody. Welcome to our latest Hangout on Air for EdTech Team Online for our unit, our course on learning space design. My name is Kyle Pace, and I'm one of the course facilitators. And today I'm joined by Tracy Purdy, who's the director of EdTech Team Online. And we have our special guest this morning is Erin Klein, who is a second grade teacher from the Detroit area, and she has done a lot of awesome work on learning space design. So we're super excited to have her here this morning. Just remember, if you do have any questions for Erin or about learning space design, please be sure to tweet those using the EdTech Team Online hashtag. And you can also find Erin by at Klein Erin on Twitter is where you can follow Erin and connect with her. So welcome, Erin. We're really excited to have you here this morning, and we'll just kick it off. If you just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you teach and how you got into the whole world of learning space design.
Sure, thank you, Kyle and Tracy. I'm super excited to be here. It's a cold Michigan day. Winter has definitely started. But I am currently a second grade teacher, like Kyle said. I've done a lot in terms of education. I've been a former literacy specialist. I've worked as an educational technology coordinator as well. However, I really just miss being in the classroom with the kids. And prior to going into teaching, I was studying interior design. So once I actually got my very first classroom, that's when I started to realize, of course, the importance of a strong sound curriculum, collaboration with colleagues, and everything in terms of good sound instructional practices. But what I found was often just kind of left by the wayside was the importance of the environmental learning space. And having studied interior design, one of the very first things that we always did was consult with the customer. And what I found interesting was no one in education was really ever consulting with the customer, the student. And so I think that's kind of when I embarked on this journey of really exploring the impact of learning spaces in the classroom, whether it was at the first grade, the middle school level, or the secondary. And that's when I just started collaborating with other people and really investigating that realm. And it's just been powerful and a whirlwind since then. So I'm excited to kind of share some of those ideas that we've discovered along the way, some of the work that we're currently still studying. And it's just been great still having an actual classroom practice to still be able to continue kind of seeing what works with kids in the actual classroom, being a current teacher.
Awesome, that's great. Erin, so what would you say, our teachers that are taking our course right now on learning space design, they've been tasked with redesigning one particular area in their classroom. They don't have to do necessarily an entire classroom redesign, but what would your suggestions be for one, how they start just rethinking that whole process of redesigning some space in their classroom?
Gosh, well, first of all, I love that you say they're tasked with one aspect or one component, because I think initially when people hear that they need to redo anything or redesign, they often think it's a complete overhaul from the ground up. So I think really specifying that it's just one small component is huge, because it kind of takes that pressure off and gives permission to start small, which is really what you need to do. So I think that in and of itself is truly best practice. And there's not a one-size-fits-all answer for that. It really is finding out what your need is. That's where you have to start. So it's not necessarily always what you, the instructor, or you, the facilitator of the classroom, want. It's really just kind of figuring out, what does your space currently already lend itself for? What is the content area being taught? What is the objective that you're trying to get across that maybe your space is inhibiting you? So for example, when I first decided to kind of start that one small change of redesign in my classroom, my need was that the furniture had to go, because I had such a small space that there was no way I could facilitate around the room. Students could move to get in collaborative groups. So for me, Kyle, it was really just trying to figure out a new layout of furniture, or kind of what we ultimately did was ditch the desks. And it was, gosh, I think in like 2011 that I wrote a couple articles on ditching the desks. I did a couple for Mindshift and Smart Brief, and they just really kind of flew. And it was kind of something that some people were exploring and kind of investigating a little bit. people were ditching their teacher desks, but no one was really talking about in our space about truly just ditching all the student desks. And of course, this doesn't mean just everybody lay on the floor, but it was really a flexible seating pathway. And now we hear about it all the time. I mean, I know our good friend Kayla Delzer has written great articles on flexible seating in her spaces for her elementary classroom. And, you know, there's been tons of work on it now. But for me, that's what it was, starting with a need. And in my particular classroom, it was the furniture. So for some people, it might be a new classroom library space. Or if they look around the room, there's just so much that first they should declutter, because it's just they can't get anywhere, do anything, or access any student materials because they just have too much stuff. So it's really just, I think, first of all, depending upon talking to your students and thinking and reflecting on your own pedagogical practices, what is your strong need first?
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes me think too about my own son. He's in 4th grade this year, and his teacher has totally implemented flexible seating, and he absolutely loves it. He loves that his area is not his personal area is not always the same area in his classroom, and there's just such a wide variety of places that he can be in the class, and he absolutely loves that. So I'm getting to experience that as a parent for the first time this school year with him. So you know, I think probably too a big thing that people think about is cost. You know, so if you want to speak to that just a little bit and maybe talk about some cost-effective ways to redesign learning spaces, or just where the cost comes in and how you keep it, you know, how you keep that ongoing too, perhaps, you know, sustainability or scalability in terms of if they wanted to do this across an entire school and have something that affects multiple classrooms.
I think that's something that's at the forefront of everyone's mind is cost. Like, all these ideas sound great, but how do I get started? So there is no cost in ditching the desks and simply removing things from your room. So for me, that was a very cost-effective way to start. And from personal experience, what I did is I applied for a grant through our parent organization. And I think that that's a real tangible way that a lot of teachers can relate to right from the start. Because oftentimes, pretty much every district, they have some sort of parental organization, PTO, PTA, something, of an outreach that they can apply for a grant or money through. They also had a program that I've used in the past called Adopt a Classroom. Sign up for that and request materials and supplies for your classroom. And they also have Digital Wish. There's tons of things. Donors Choose. And I've spoken to so many people. Every time I go to speak at conferences, as soon as I mention Donors Choose, like, you can see the faces just light up in the room. So I always follow up with the question, who's received grant money through Donors Choose? And every time, just hands across the entire room raise. So I always like to mention those opportunities because I don't think sometimes teachers know about those. And there's really just great opportunities for free money out there that if you just kind of request and ask for it, you can get. And I also always, you know, like to say, don't be afraid to even ask your own administrative team, because sometimes I know even though budgets are tight, they have certain funds money in, but they have no place to allocate it because it has to be for certain things. And classroom furniture might be one of those, or classroom supplies. It might not be, you know, no money in the professional learning or technology budget, but they might have something in terms of supplies for classroom. So I always like to say never forget that as well. But also, there's something to be said too about not necessarily going huge and saying, oh, I need a complete overhaul and I'm gonna need such a huge budget. But if you're just doing flexible seating, for example, you don't need 20 yoga balls to replace your 20 seats. You know, you can get 4 yoga balls, and then you can get like 4 mats, and you can get, you know, just try a different variety in the classroom. And I think a lot of times people think that they need uniformity still, but if you're being flexible, there's something also to be said about variety as well. And necessarily going to need to replace everything at once. For example, in our classroom, in our school building right now, we have one classroom who's experimenting kind of and letting the students kind of do the action research throughout the year. She's experimenting with her learning environment in terms of our 5th grade classrooms. And they have something that's similar to the steel case node chairs that spin with the extra shelving on the bottom. So far, the kids love them. They love the portability, the movability, and but she didn't replace all the classroom seats at once. She's just kind of starting small. But some of my other favorite things to talk about in terms of cost, Kyle, are lighting. I think a lot of times people don't think the impact that lighting can have on learning, and it doesn't often cost a lot of money to just change out the fluorescence for incandescence. If you have a couple lamps around the house, or simply even opening up windows if you have those in your classroom to let that natural light in. So just small changes, even thinking about when you are designing a bulletin board, instead of getting something that's pattern oriented with lots of distracting features like polka dots or chevron print, really just keeping things to flat, minimalistic colors that are more solid in nature. Because if you look at the research, it really supports a very minimalistic environment for the classroom. So there's tons of cost-effective ways that you can make small changes that are very cost-effective.
Awesome, thank you. What about, what about parents? That's just something I just thought of, and were parents involved in any way with the redesign process, or did you have to do any kind of, I guess, onboarding almost is kind of what I think of, because, parents are probably, they've become pretty used to the traditional look in classrooms. So was that a challenge for you, or did that, what did you have to do to kind of bring them on board when talking about this whole idea of changing up what the learning space looks like?
So I think that when parents hear about it, it might be a little bit more difficult for them to kind of conceptualize, because it is such an abstract, such a traditional environment. However, once they see it in action, or once they see the children in the space, the students in the learning environment, that's when kind of that aha moment occurs. So for me, most of the parents were able to kind of see the space through open house, which happens a few weeks after students have been in the space. And it's really nice to kind of see the students take ownership and say, oh, Mom, Dad, come check this out. This is what we did here. And I think when they're own children and they see the impact, rather than just kind of hearing about it, they can understand it a little bit more. But of course, when they drop their students off first day, they are going to see things that look a lot different. And there might be some kind of shock there, some questions, because it doesn't look like your very traditional desks and rows kind of environment. But I think they get the feel of comfort as soon as they walk in. I often say that I've always wanted the type of classroom that when the learners are walking by in the hallways, if they kind of look, they can't help but kind of want to gravitate in and look and say, whoa, is this a classroom? I've even had kids say before, I thought this was the place where the teachers go. And I think there's just something to be said about that whenever you create a cozy environment where it's just truly inviting and warm for people to want to be a part of. And I think it honestly just makes sense if we think as adult learners, whether it's collaborating in any profession, when we go to meet with someone, if we go to a conference room, there's often plants in the room, lamps, incandescent lighting, there's resources available for your fingertips at eye level display. Things look aesthetically pleasing. They don't ask us to sit one behind the other and face forward. Oftentimes we're in collaborative groups or circles brainstorming together. Or if we go into maybe not a conference or office area type room, but we meet with a couple of individuals to just brainstorm outside of the workday. We often meet at like a Panera Bread or a Starbucks or a Barnes and Noble. And we're not sitting staring at the back of someone's head. We're sitting in small groups. And so I think it does make sense when people see it and when they hear about it and they're like, oh, I wish school was like this for me. And I think that it's just been a really open, inviting time for us. And I don't think that there's been a lot of resistance. There have been a few parents along the way who have questioned about like classroom management. Like, well, what happens, well, when does the teacher actually teach? If the students are just talking all the time because they're always in these groups. And then I often just invite them in and say, why don't you just come see or just come watch like a half-hour part of our day. But once you kind of explain or even role play that a little bit with them, they get honestly excited about it. And they're so thankful that their children get to experience something that isn't so traditional in nature, because they know as working professionals themselves that that's not the type of environment they're in. So their students are really starting to get an authentic learning experience right from second grade.
Awesome. And Erin, I'm just trying to remember too, for anyone that's not familiar with Erin's blog, it's called kleinspiration.com. So I highly encourage you to check that out. But Erin, don't you have some pictures on your blog of your classroom that if anyone wants to see what your actual space looks like, don't you have that somewhere on your website?
I do, absolutely. And I just went through an overhaul of my website, switching over blogging platforms recently. So it might be easiest to find if you honestly just Google my name, Erin Klein, Klein, and then classroom pictures, you'll get a tremendous amount of information or learning. And Scholastic is another blog that I was part of their top teaching team for the past 3 years. And I've written a few articles on Scholastic's website as well. So even if you Google, I've got great articles for before and after pictures, kind of showing where I started, and then the big messy middle, and then where we kind of are now in terms of our learning space. So Scholastic and Erin Klein Classroom would be a great Google search for people. I always start with Google. I think it's really easy to just find things that way. Kyle, I know you agree.
Yeah, I always agree, yes.
So, if you just Google like Erin Klein or Kleinspiration and Classroom Learning Space, that's where I think the easiest kind of point of reference will be.
Awesome, awesome. Tracy, did we have any questions come in that you've seen, or or any other questions that you've got?
No, not so far coming in. Erin, I'm just curious too about, like, you talked a lot about how, I would love if you would maybe share a little bit more your feelings behind what redesigning the classroom does for students. I know you touched on it a little bit, but why is this an important thing? Why should teachers really start focusing on this and start getting rid of those desks that are connected to the chairs? What is that going to do for the learners in their classroom?
So huge impact. That's the why, Tracy, and I'm so glad you brought it back to that, because oftentimes it's great when we think, oh, I want to make a classroom, and I often say, don't make it Pinterest pretty. So it's great, of course, to make an aesthetically pleasing classroom, but you want to kind of avoid things that are going to be distracting for students. And when I talked in the beginning today about consulting with your client or your customer or your students, that's really where it starts from. And if you really think about who you're servicing or who you're teaching, think about their needs. And every single year my classroom changes. And when I think about the types of learners that I have in my space, what are their learning differences? What are their learning styles? What are their learning deficits? What are their opportunities of strength capitalize on? So when I think about furniture arrangement, when I think about lighting, when I think about what I put on display, it all goes back to the research 100%. Carnegie Mellon has done some research in terms of attention to allocation. And one of the research pieces that they put out was they did a meta-analysis study on 2 different classroom learning environments. One in which was heavy on environmental print, the other which was very minimalistic in nature. And the outcome of this, same pedagogical practice, instructional methodologies, but the outcome was that the students in the minimalistic environment outperformed the students who were in the heavy environmental print. And as they kind of dug further into this research and started looking at the why behind it and really started thinking about the learners in this space, it was everything about the students were able to focus on the content at hand, the discussion that was transpiring, and the learning that was actually happening within the classroom space. It wasn't about the students being distracted. It wasn't about what was on the walls for decoration. It was really about the meat and potatoes of what they were there to do, their focus and task at hand. And I think when you look to the classroom makeups that we have, classrooms are not getting smaller. It'd be nice if they were, but they're not. So, and I love to say, you know, I'm a real teacher in a real classroom still. I get it. Classroom sizes are increasing. Our resources are decreasing. You know, it's great now that we do have technology and assistive technology to help and support, whether we're doing flipped classroom or blended learning or whatever buzzword of pedagogical practice that you want to put on it. that all helps. But at the end of the day, we know the biggest impact is the student to teacher ratio. Like, how many kids are you actually able to work with? And if you're oversized classroom and you can't truly get to every single child and meet them where they are, that's a problem. But when you start thinking about redesign, there's so many things that are overlooked that can just be small changes to help that. And when you look at, not only are classroom sizes increasing, but then students' needs are increasing too. And that's a whole nother topic of the why, but we know it's a fact. The students who have different learning needs in our classrooms are paramount. Being a mom of two, I know firsthand, like, my daughter is the high flyer, she's great. Now my son, he has a variety of needs that need to be met. And I want him to be in classroom environments where those needs can be met. And when we think just as teachers, the student makeup that we have, the Center for Disease Control has done, it's the most recent study, but it was 2011, and granted it's almost 2017, but the number of students ages 4 to 17, so these are school-age children who have been diagnosed with ADHD, it's a high percentage, 17%. So if we look at that, it's huge. And when we think about, that's just one learning difference that we're having. And we know that we have students with a variety in our classroom. So how are we able to not distract those learners in our classroom so that they can have those minimalistic environments where their best outcomes can happen? And if we're not starting at the foundational level of setting them up for success with their classroom learning environment, it doesn't matter what curriculum you have, because they're not able to focus on it, period. And that was 11%, not 17%.
Okay.
Sorry.
Awesome. Thank you. We did have a couple of questions come in. Thoughts on, like, Monday, going in Monday morning? What's one easy change that can be made right away?
Sit back and look at your students as they're working and have a conversation with them and ask them what they would do. That, I think, getting the student voice involved is the very first step. And I know that that's not giving you a tangible, like, this is what you do day one, design on a dime. But it's definitely where you should start, is getting the student voice involved. So that's what I would do Monday walking in, because they're going to have, you know, everyone says it's not me that's the smartest person in the room, it's the room collectively, right? We've heard that time and time again. It's true. So ask the ones who are using the space, ask your learners, whether it's secondary or kinder. They're going to have the greatest ideas, because there are one of you in the classroom and how many of them, and they're the ones you're asking to actually utilize the space. So that's where your greatest ideas are going to come from. But something super easy is just really, what I would do is just kind of walk in and look at the layout and see, is it open and inviting? And if not, then think about your furniture arrangements. Just kind of glance around at your walls. And if there's a ton of stuff, I mean, you know, I joke about this, but you don't want to look like the teacher store exploded. I have such a problem with walking in. Like, we have Lakeshore Learning literally less than a mile from my house. Like, so to be able to walk in, you know, like a really good stuff store or Lakeshore Learning, you see everything, and, you know, it's true, less is more. So just really thinking about your actual environment and reflecting on how can you make it more minimalistic in nature, and then what can you remove from it, because it should not be a teacher workspace. If you're really doing, we do a lot of the workshop teaching strategies in our classroom, whether it's math workshop, reading workshop, writing workshop, pretty much just hands-on student-centered learning. And if you're doing those sort of pedagogical practices, you really need to think about, does your space lend itself for that? And if your classroom looks more like a teacher space than a student space, there's a problem. If students look around and there are more teacher materials than student materials, that's a problem. So really just kind of thinking about, what does your space say about what's happening within it, or what should be happening within it?
That's awesome advice, because I think back to, I always thought, like, oh, maybe if I put a poster up on the wall with this on it, maybe they'll read it and learn it. But it's probably totally then distracting from what the lesson is at that moment. So that's a good lesson for all of us, for sure. And then, do you have any opinions too about, you know, creating the work walls in the classroom? So taking down a bulletin board and changing it to a work wall. Do you think that that's worth it, those whiteboard walls?
Are you talking about like the dry erase just idea kind of project based? Or
Yep.
okay. I'm sure if you were saying word wall, because I was like, oh yeah, we have a word wall.
Work.
Yeah, student work. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, wasn't very clear with that. So do you think it's worth it?
Number one, I love that because it's always changing. So it's very organic in nature. And I think that, you know, Susan Kovalik has done research in terms of what is best for the brain in terms of learning. And I love her integrated thematic model of teaching and everything that she does there. But pretty much it boils down to the brain seeks novelty as well, and the brain seeks pattern. So we need novelty. We need things that change. As an elementary teacher, when I move where the tape or the stapler is, kids come in Monday and they're like, whoa, something's changed. They're all out, they're like, the tape is moved. I mean, it's like a big deal. So you can imagine if they come in and something that really enhances the learning experience has altered or changed. Instant engagement, right? So at least you've captured them for that short second. And especially if it's something that the students have input towards, they love it. So if it's something that could capture their interest for just that 3 or 4 seconds, then you've got them. Then where do you take them next? And be ready for that. So, and especially if it comes from them intrinsically, then automatically they're interested in it. So think about that. I think that that is huge and really important in classroom learning spaces. And it's always current too. You know, you walk into the classroom and you see on the wall the said is dead, you know, 20 other words you can use other than said to enhance your writing piece, or, you know, all the doubles facts, or the alphabet perimetering the ceiling, or, you know, you think about those and it's, gosh, how many years has that been up? And do students really reference it? So for example, in our classroom, we do, like I had mentioned earlier, writing workshops. So whenever we have an anchor chart for learning that goes to that particular teaching point, once we have used it for that particular lesson, picture of it, and then email that picture to myself, throw it in PowerPoint or some sort of, you know, document, and then get a couple thumbnail images, print it off, cut those out, and the students glue those individual pictures right within their own writing portfolio or binder as a resource, so that if they need it, they can still reference it, and it's not somewhere on the wall, but it's at their fingertips. And it's now off the wall, so it's not distracting, and it doesn't become that permanent wallpaper in the classroom either. So I think that that's important to note. But yeah, I think that those sorts of strategies are great for classrooms.
Awesome, thanks, Erin. So I don't see any other questions coming in. So we will probably just go ahead and wrap up our discussion about learning spaces with Erin for this morning. And thank you again so much, Erin. This was awesome. Thanks for giving up your time on a Saturday morning. I know we have lots of folks watching live, but also we'll have lots of folks also watching after today. So we really thank you for the time this morning. This was really, really beneficial. And I'm sure you'll get some tweets after today as well, and on the EdTech Team Online hashtag, and directly mentioned to you too. So just thanks again, and we really, really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. It was great. So, and I'm happy to answer any questions or follow up in any way I can. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Erin.